Hey everybody, this is Chris Roscoe and this is Operation Milkshine. Today I have Julie Mastrine back with us again. Thank God. I heard you pronounce your last name. I've been saying it wrong this whole time.
That's common.
Yeah, and today we're going to be talking about free speech. We're going to be talking about free speech from the perspective of the psychological impacts of either hindering or allowing free speech. And we're also going to be talking about how each different subsection of the political spectrum views free speech and see if we can put together a cohesive argument and a collective idea of what this issue actually looks like and some things to look at and some things to consider. So I think what would be best before we start looking at the political side of it, or no, before we start looking at the psychological side of it, would be to look at the political side first so that we can take that into consideration when looking at the mental health stuff and actually just seeing what the fuck we're talking about.
Yeah, this is a really hot topic in the political sphere right now, and actually in the tech world.
Really?
Yes. In terms of social media platforms and even like crowdfunding sites like Patreon, there's a lot of debate, a lot of things going on around free speech in terms of these tech companies and what speech they allow and who they ban and why and what's allowed to be said and what's not allowed to be said. So it's just as much a psychological concern as it is a concern with how we use our technologies.
Yeah, see, that's interesting. I've been hearing about this Patreon thing with, Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson. Obviously, all the huge purge that happened on Facebook. Even Twitter's been clamping down. So I've only been paying attention from a periphery. Can you tell me a little bit more about what's been going on?
Yeah, so I mean, I followed the Patreon fiasco. I would call it a fiasco. Pretty closely. And basically, Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin became, and a number of other people that are part of the intellectual dark web, became concerned when Patreon banned Sargon of Akkad, who is one of the most popular Patreon content creators. He had a huge number of, I guess they call them patrons. So he was on another show on YouTube, not his own show on his YouTube channel, but somebody else's. And he was describing being harassed by alt-right trolls who were making his life so miserable and threatening him to such a degree that he had to alert the police. And in describing these folks, he used the N-word and said they were acting like white versions of the people they detest. So he claims that he was using their terminology against them and not using that slur in earnest when taken in context. So, but that aside from, agreeing with his use of the term, which I don't think people agree with that.
It's just stupid, if anything.
Yeah, or necessarily think that was necessary, right? But regardless of that, what the actual issue is that he said that on a different channel. He didn't say that on his channel that he's using Patreon funding to create. So Patreon terms of service explicitly state that there are certain things you're not allowed to say. They have hate speech guidelines. And that applies to Patreon, the platform itself. And that's a direct quote from Patreon's CEO, who appeared on the Rubin Report and said that, we're not going to monitor you on Twitter or whatever. These guidelines apply to Patreon, the platform itself. So when they banned Sargon of Akkad, a lot of people were very concerned that this was actually politically motivated, because Sargon of Akkad he's anti-PC. He's a classical liberal, which comes with a lot of controversial opinions these days. And so people were saying, this is not fair. Patreon is targeting him. This was politically motivated. He didn't say anything through his Patreon funded content that violated the guidelines. So that is when Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin became really concerned, because they explore controversial ideas and say controversial things. And they became worried that that their free speech was at stake as long as they were using Patreon. So this issue has a lot of facets to it because Patreon is located in Silicon Valley, where there's a lot of left-leaning people working at these sites. And for people on the left, language can be so harmful that it's actually violence. That's what they think, that it can lead to real world violence, that it has consequences, and that we should make sure that people are not using words or phrases or whatever, or sharing ideas that could lead to violence, or even that just like hurt the feelings of other people, right? While those on the right say that that's a really arbitrary line, and that the goalposts are getting the goalposts for acceptable speech are getting narrower, which is actually going to narrow the range of thoughts that we're allowed to express. And that hate speech is not clearly defined, and it's subjective, and we're all responsible for our own feelings. If someone uses a nasty name at you, then you can just brush that off, and that policing it actually has greater negative implications than just allowing people to say what they want. And so it's and there's some other things there as well. It's like, in order to explore some moral questions that humanity has, we have to assume that we don't already know all the answers. And hate speech guidelines and certain guidelines that tech companies have, they assume that we already know the answer to every moral question. But we really need speech to be unrestricted in order to explore ideas. So very different ideas on the left and the right. And this all ties into technology and how we use our platforms, how we're allowed to use these platforms. And like you said, Facebook and Twitter also have had a lot of high profile incidents around free speech like this. So that's the Patreon thing in a nutshell, and a little bit about the politics.
That's super interesting. So I feel like I understand the more centrist / right-wing understanding of free speech and everything you just outlined. I feel like that makes core sense to me in a way the other stuff doesn't. Can you outline the left-wing argument for me so that I can understand like what the hell they're talking about?
Yeah, and I'll try to do as good of a job as I can. I used to be more of that mindset, and lately it's been harder for me to grasp it. But from what I understand, and people can leave comments if I get it wrong, but from what I understand, the idea is that there are ideas and words and expressions that society should not accept, that we should basically have a hardline stance against certain abhorrent ideas that might lead to violence, that might lead to divisions in society, ideas that are intolerant of people who are different from us. The idea is that we should be intolerant of intolerance, that we should not tolerate or allow ideas that could have these negative consequences. Yeah.
So it's the idea that some thoughts, some forms of speech and expression are so inherently dangerous that we need to stop any utterance of these words for the potential catastrophe that they could cause.
I think it's the idea that like, oh, you have freedom of speech, but not freedom from consequences of your speech. That's kind of the refrain that I hear said a lot, which is that like, if you have ideas that are going to hurt society, then you need to see that we won't tolerate that. There will be consequences. We'll cut off your access to Patreon. We'll cut you off from PayPal. We'll make sure that you cannot operate in society. That's how we'll show you that we don't tolerate your ideas and that your ideas are bad. So
yeah, and so to a certain degree, I can understand that,
Yeah.
Like there's certain things that are just like really like, because I was thinking about recently this whole thing about no platforming people like Richard Spencer.
Yeah.
And it's like, if he wants to have a YouTube channel, I don't think you should really be able to stop him from having a YouTube channel or a Facebook thing or anything like that. But I think it makes sense to not allow like an actual self-identified Nazi to speak at colleges. To me, that seems fair. You know, it's like that's a place of education and things like that. That seems like a natural, like a fairly sensible boundary to set. But the
Yeah.
thing that I'm hearing lacking, and what I think is a major point of contention, and correct me if I'm wrong, is who's deciding what is acceptable and what isn't, and then who's deciding where these unacceptable things are allowed to be, and who's deciding the consequences for infringing on these restrictions.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. It basically requires that it requires that there is some authority on what are the right ideas and what are the acceptable ideas and what are the ideas that we're not allowed to touch or that we should not even discuss, that are just so abhorrent that like we shouldn't even look at them, right? Or we shouldn't allow them any platform, we shouldn't allow them any airtime. And I think the reason this debate is getting so heated is because a lot of folks, particularly in the center on the right, are saying that the ideas that people are trying to push off of universities or off of platforms like Patreon are actually not dangerous ideas, that they're actually the truth. And that society is moving away from the truth, and that the people who are now saying, you know, you have bad ideas, so you can't speak here, actually have some bad ideas themselves. So they are, so it's actually, yeah, it's about the danger in deplatforming people is that the people who are deciding who gets to speak actually are wrong themselves. And then if they deplatform people who might be trying to tell the truth, then we'll never get to hear those ideas.
Yeah, and it seems like kind of arbitrary in that just the fact that, you know, Mark Zuckerberg managed to create Facebook, and just because he was able to create a technological platform, that doesn't inherently say anything about the will or the ability to govern. And to a certain degree, they're taking that upon themselves when the skills of creating code and the tech platform aren't translatable to governing and leading.
Yeah, and people are asking them to govern speech. And this is something that I recently heard some folks at a tech company talk about. They were like, we need to be really careful about what we're asking big companies like Facebook and Google to do, because we are asking them to like police ideas, right? To police the bounds of expression. And that's something that we decided long ago in our Constitution that the government wouldn't do, right? So now there's all these interesting questions around like, when is something like a public good? Like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube are so ubiquitous. Like when does something become, even if it was created in the private market, when does it get so big and monolithic that it actually needs to be bound by some rules that allow for freedom?
And I think that's a really good point, because it's like because a lot of engagements are happening online right now. And so it's like in schools, for instance, you know, it's like, you know how to stop bullying in a school. It's like a kid punches another kid, he gets expelled, or he gets detention, or he gets punished in some level.
Yeah.
But it's like when people are actually getting bullied to the point of committing suicide, and granted, you could say that, you know, that's like they could turn away or anything like that. But with how pervasive social media is, that's not really an option anymore. Like if you've become the victim of something, like if you are someone and they made a meme out of you, like especially for something that's vulnerable to you. Like me and my friend were talking about this woman that was in a GameStop, this trans woman, and you know she was misgendered, so she got super mad and angry, and so she's become a meme.
Oh, I saw that video. Yeah.
Yeah, and my friend was talking about it, I was like, dude, like this is an example of a meme that could lead someone to kill themselves. And it's like, that's fucking valid. It really is. And it's like, at what point do we need to actually stop these things? Because if you can't get away from it, you can't stop yourself from seeing it unless you just avoid the internet altogether, in which case you're avoiding, you know, your friends and your family and your news and like things that make you laugh. And like, if you become a meme which is something that you don't have any control over, the internet is now a dangerous place for you.
Yeah.
Or
Totally.
if you've said something that people deem dangerous, like with our friend we were talking about, the internet becomes an unsafe place for you.
Yeah.
And that can have long reaching and substantial mental health impacts. It can have impacts on your career. It can have impacts on your relationships. And so I think when it comes to the internet, this idea that like zero censorship is the way to go, I don't think actually holds up in the complexity of what the internet actually is in our lives. But the idea that since all the tech companies are left leaning, we're only getting a one-sided view of the argument. And so it's essentially giving our ability to communicate and how we communicate and where we do it, that's put in the hands of people that we may not agree with.
Right. Yeah.
Or who may be so one-sided that they create blind spots that are actually toxic to the rest of us. And we can't call them on them because they control the platforms in which we would call them on it.
Right. Yeah. And it's like how we define harassment really matters, right? Like sharing a meme of someone and making fun of them, is that harassment? Is it harassment to use the N-word? Is it like how do we actually define what is okay and what is not okay? And these are really tough questions that nobody really has good answers to. And we kind of have two sides of things, where we have the left being like pretty cautious about stuff. And what I mean is like they might be more quick to ban certain behaviors. And then the right pushing back and saying, well, wait a minute, you're like going too far. If this isn't okay, it's like this tension between the two, right? Which is good. And that's what we need. We always need two sides of things to create balance. But I think that, yeah, we're in a really interesting time where these tech companies just have so much power. And something that's been interesting for me to consider is like, if you have controversial opinions like Sargon of Akkad, and I mean, regardless of him using the N-word, he has controversial opinions. Like I said, he's very like anti-PC culture or whatever. And you believe you're telling the truth and you want to get the truth out there to people. So you have a YouTube channel and you have a Twitter and you have a Facebook and maybe you have a podcast, whatever. But then people decide that what you're saying is harassment or whatever, transphobic, xenophobic, misogynist, all these words we use for behavior that people don't like. And then you get banned from all of these platforms. Like, what do you actually do? And this is what I've been thinking about a lot with tech becoming a monolith. It's like, if you're banned from Facebook, PayPal, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, where do you actually go? Like, and is it good to push people who have views we don't like into the shadows? Like, is it better to have abhorrent views out in the open so that we can debate them and have the truth prevail? Or is it better to deplatform people and say, you're an unperson, you're no longer a part of this society, like you're banished, right? And then they have to find some darker, seedier corner of the web to speak, basically. So I think that one thing we need to consider is that aspect of like, do we want to push bad ideas into the darkness? Are they just going to become monsters and emboldened? Or do we want to fight them out in the open?
I mean, that's the really tough thing, because it's like I said before, it's like if it'd be one thing if you had a group of people like mobbing around your house, yelling shit that was really upsetting to you. Like, you could easily just call the cops and have that dealt with. Be like, there's a fucking mob outside of my house. Like, get these people out of my house. You could easily deal with that. But if there's a mob of people like yelling at you and you get off Facebook to not hear the yelling and then they start yelling at you on Instagram or like Twitter and YouTube, it's like, what the fuck do you do?
Yeah.
And so...
And the psychological threat is, the psychological aspect is probably the same. I mean, or similar, right, to it happening in real life versus it happening online. You're probably
I would think it'd be even worse because it can come to you at the worst times. It's like, let me check my email. It's like, oh, they want me to kill myself. Fucking interesting.
And all of our, our workplaces are online, and you can't it's hard to be a member of society anymore without like being on the internet. So yeah, you're right. It could follow you anywhere. And it's interesting. I've been thinking a lot about online mobs because I see it happening so much lately, where it happened to someone I know recently, where they expressed views that a community deemed abhorrent for whatever reason, and they, went after their business, flooded their webpage with a bunch of negative reviews, just kind of created a mob of people to like take this person down because they have views that we don't like, right? And it just raises a lot of questions about like, what is our duty as humans? Like, do we just disassociate from people that have views we don't like, or are we supposed to like do something about it and make sure everybody else knows and make sure people don't go to their business and things like that? And without a level of like critical thinking skills, I think that stuff can get really out of hand, and you really run the risk of like scapegoating people.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, that's what like the story of Jesus Christ was about, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
he was saying things that people didn't like, and essentially there was a group of people that were out to get him, and they crucified him. And like, that's what that story is about, is the human tendency to do this, to engage in this scapegoat mechanism,
Mm-hmm.
this psychological tendency to identify that person is the cause of all of our problems, get him,
And specifically with the intent to maintain control, because that's
right.
like what the whole story of that was. It's like he was like shaking shit up, and the Romans were like, "No way, bro! I don't think so. Like you're fucking everything up for us."
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of this has to do as well, is because like on partisan lines, people essentially pick their partisan lines emotionally, right? Like you can, what is it, like 94%? You can pick somebody's. You can identify someone's political leaning with 94% accuracy just based on their like emotional makeup, their psychological makeup.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so I think it's 94. I think it's that high. I'd have to double check. But basically the idea is it's like your political affiliations are more or less outlined by the time you have a formed personality. And they're so innately unique to you, and they're so deeply embedded that what we're talking about is people's worldview. And so when you challenge people on that, you're challenging a worldview, and that those kind of deep-seated emotional lines don't seem to be the type of things that we should be legislating off of. If anything, we should try to overcome those in order to legislate.
Right. Yeah.
And
seems like emotions.
And so which is interesting to me, because I really feel for people that have mobs come after them. I really feel for people that are like bullied into suicide, or people that are just bullied in general, like a lot of, like I read sometimes about what happens to people that become memes, and some of them, their lives just become unlivable.
Oh yeah. I've read about that as well.
And it's awful. And at the same time, like we were talking about earlier, this is where I see the real danger, and where I really push back on the PC thing, is like, just from a psychological level, like, and if you have a baseline understanding of the way the shadow works, it's like if you try to cover these things up, you in fact make them stronger. Yep. Like in the example of like, let's just talk about fucking actual Nazis. Like in the wake of the Charlottesville thing, like, yeah, Richard Spencer doesn't feel good holding rallies anymore. That's, as far as I'm concerned, that's actually a plus. So like, I've actually said like, okay, you know what, Antifa, you guys got one. You guys got one. Good for you. But at the same time, I watch documentaries about what happens to these people when they can't rally. What they do is they say, okay, we need to be less offensive. We need to blend in. We need to get into politics. We need to make sure that we look like everyone else so no one can tell what we're doing. And we need to be so low key so that we can get these ideas spread without anybody knowing that we're doing it. Or, like you said earlier, they find these like deeper pockets of the internet, like 4chan or some new shit they may be making. Yeah. And they can be revolting, and they can get worse and worse and worse. And they end up breeding this toxicity because they aren't allowed to communicate with the people that would potentially have a positive influence on them. They've been pushed away from the thing that would temper their worldviews into this thing that's only going to make them worse. Yeah. And it's like, that's as far as I'm concerned, that's where the whole incel thing came from.
Yeah,
It's
probably.
like, really insecure guys suddenly, in the last few years have all the world's problems put on their shoulders, but still told that they need to like sit down, shut up, but also behave like strong people in the same sense, to be good people, but also not be good. And it's like this very interesting thing that's happened to the male psyche. And some guys broke because of it.
Yeah.
And it's like, to me, that's kind of understandable. And it's more than understandable. It's to be expected. It's inevitable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so to me, that's the real difficult balance here, is because if you don't censor at all, then people will do horrible things that they cannot get away from.
Yeah.
But if you censor too much, you actually create a monster that's much worse than the one you intended to silence.
Exactly. Yeah. There has to be some balance. I think that, yeah, it's because it's really hard to argue that that no censorship makes sense online, like you said. There surely has to be some line of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, but we can't seem to agree on what that line is. And it's always in danger of being taken too far by people who want to have power or don't want to be confronted to think critically about their own views. So yeah, it's very difficult, and it's just a problem that's like nobody has good answers to right now, but I wonder if there'll ever be like some sort of consensus, but
well, I think if we could have some kind of way to actually engage in cross-platform communication, because the way I've just outlined it, of like, ooh, you don't want to create monsters that are worse, but at the same time, you don't want to be like having people kill themselves because they were bullied too often. Like,
yeah,
as far as I know, I'm the first person I've ever heard outline it in those terms before.
yeah,
I don't think there's a lot of people that even have interest in looking at it as a thing that has two potential catastrophes that are worth avoiding. It's like,
yeah,
on one hand, you've got people that are like, oh no, you can't stop us, because like freedom is speech and all sorts of shit. And the other one's like, oh, but people and blah, blah, blah.
yeah,
And they're not even aware of the monsters they're creating, or the fact that there's actually two very big problems to solve. They only see
right.
one. And I
Yeah,
think that's the biggest issue here.
yeah, yeah, I would agree. And I mean, I personally err more on the side of like free speech. I would take more of like I believe it's better to be like more cautious and less quick to like ban ideas, particularly in the realm of like political ideas. And this is another thing that is starting to get interesting to me, is like, what's the line between like an idea versus a behavior, right? Because someone will say something that someone believes is like racist or sexist or whatever, but is that a thought or a behavior? Like, okay, I thought this was kind of interesting with the video that got Alex Jones banned from Twitter and a bunch of stuff. I don't know if you watched that, but he went up to a reporter
I did see that, actually.
at a congressional hearing, and he was saying all this stuff, making it very clear that he didn't like this guy and like whatever, saying all this stuff. And he got banned for, I don't remember exactly what the term was, but it was like, like his behavior, right?
I thought that was so stupid. He was just being a cartoon at that point.
Right, but yeah, and for me, I was like, well, he was just like saying stuff, and you can walk away when someone's saying stuff that you don't like, right? Like, you can remove yourself. So is that like, that's where that got weird for me, is I was like, well, yeah, he's saying things that I'm sure a lot of people really don't like. But is that like, this is where the debate about speech and violence comes in. Like, was that violent behavior? Was that harassing behavior when this person could have like removed themselves from the situation, right?
Yeah.
He wasn't like assaulting him.
I mean, I'm personally of the mind where I think that, like, unless you physically assaulted somebody, then you didn't do anything illegal.
I agree, because I think that once we get into the realm of like, you can't say that, it gets really, really dangerous. And I've seen this with governments, like we still see it with governments saying you can't say that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what the effect is. I mean, a government is essentially a group of people telling another group of people they can't say certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And anytime you hand over that authority to a group of people, like, that is just ripe for abuse,
Mm-hmm.
right? That group of people is gonna try to squash ideas that don't suit their agenda, don't suit their grasp on power. It's just not a good idea to give people that power.
And that's one of the downsides to having the shadow, is that the people that want to control everything to stop people end up becoming that which they despise.
Yeah.
Bullying people off the yeah, exactly. It comes full circle.
Yep.
And I was thinking, and it seems like a big problem is that we're not actually thinking about how to protect people from this kind of pain. It seems like what we're focusing on is how to control others.
Right. And maybe society does need to talk more about, like, if maybe we need more individual skills to, like, handle facing ideas that we don't like or comments that are hurtful, instead of trying to control the other person. We only can really control ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan Haidt talks a lot about this. He's a professor at NYU. He talks about the coddling of the American mind, and he talks about how generation, is it Z? They're younger than millennials.
Yeah, I think that's right.
That's Z. So they have grown up in a culture that says that they shouldn't be exposed to anything that might hurt them. And so what is happening now is that these they're now students, or they're in workplaces, they're young, but they now are more likely to, like, go to an authority and say, this person said something that hurt me, like, you should do something about it, right? So instead of, like, owning your own feelings and response, you go to an authority and say, make that person stop because I don't feel good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not actually a healthy mindset. It actually leads to anxiety and depression, because you believe that what happens in the world is what is going to create your internal peace. And what happens in the world is the most, like, unreliable thing out there. Like, all you really have control of are the, cubic inches within your own skull. I think George Orwell said that. So obviously not a direct quote, but something to that degree. So what is the psychological impact of believing that it's up to somebody else to protect us from harm?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because what that's saying is that, first of all, it's like you have no agency to control your reaction to things.
Yeah.
But it's also saying that the person that can potentially save and or protect you from these things is outside of you.
Yeah.
There's no conversation of boundary setting. There's no conversation of emotional responsibility. There's no conversation of creating your own experience. It's just like, outside thing hurt me. I need outside thing to protect me from that.
Right.
And so to me, and it's very problematic, because it's like, and I'm not saying that this is any conspiracy or anything like that, but I think what happens is this, I don't think this was created by somebody to gain power, but could easily be exploited by someone who wants power.
Right.
Of saying that, like, hey, I can be the one that protects you from everything.
Yep.
You need protection from all these bad, scary things. I got your back.
Yep.
And it's like, that's kind of how you get Stalin.
Yeah, exactly. That's the psychological mindset that leads to authoritarianism.
Yeah.
It creates a space for someone to exploit that power. So that's why, like, getting square with, and it's hard, right? It can be hard to say, like, oh, you've been memed and people are sharing this video of you and making fun of you. Well, you're just gonna have to, like, get strong inside. Like, that sounds like I kind of wish there was, like, something more we could say, but it's like, that just might be the truth, is that things are gonna happen to you that are gonna hurt, and you really do have to get strong in yourself,
especially because it's arbitrary.
Yeah. What do you mean?
Like, you could become a meme for no fucking reason.
Yeah.
Like, I've probably done at least 3 things today that could make me into a meme where people would just like ravage me on the internet for weeks.
Yeah.
Every day I probably do cringy shit that people could make fun of me if it happened to be on video.
Right. Yeah, totally. We're
And
all
so,
humans.
yeah,
Or even the things I say, like, you know, in private or whatever, where I'm just kind of like teasing out ideas, and then I'm like, oh, well, like, actually, I don't really believe that. But you're just like kind of like exploring thoughts and ideas. Like, you need to have some space and like freedom to do that in order to be able to discern what's right and wrong. And so, yeah, when we start setting those rules of this is wrong and this is right, and it's up to some external authority to figure it out.
I think you just
Especially
pointed
another
to
human
something.
who's flawed.
You just pointed to something really fucking key, is teasing out ideas. Because it's like we all talk about like racism is one of the big things.
Yeah.
But the only way to actually get over your racism is to acknowledge it and like actually look at the ideas.
Yeah.
But you can't acknowledge your own racism and look at the ideas if you have nowhere you can express them.
Right. Yeah.
So racism goes from being this thing that we could have potentially conquered if we were willing to really be real about how we feel and examine it and face the implications of it, both on our own minds and on the culture around us. Because it reminds me of like the thing that got me turned on to all this shadow stuff in the first place is my mind had become a toxic, evil place.
Mm.
And the only thing that allowed me to recover from that was expressing all those toxic, evil thoughts.
Mm.
And now
Yeah.
they're not a part of my life anymore because I was
Yeah.
able to get them all out and I was able to analyze them and assess them on my own terms and be like, I don't actually think this. And like, wow, I must have been really hurt to come up with that idea. Like, wow, Jesus fuck.
Yeah.
And without the ability to express, like because I talked about a lot of this on Facebook, I talked a lot about this like everywhere because this was my life.
Yeah.
And if I couldn't do that stuff because, you know, it was upsetting to someone who was still in the experience of just having the symptoms without having the clarity of working through it like me, where I could have potentially triggered them and made them feel worse, it's like, I wouldn't be here if I didn't get to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my mind wouldn't have ever cleared up. Like I don't have those thoughts anymore. My level of love and compassion is exponentially greater because I have such a good relationship with all my most evil, terrible thoughts.
Yeah. And you
And,
had the freedom to explore them
mm-hmm.
and see them out and expel them.
And it also goes for like I have this little mini, it's only 4 videos, but I have this like little mini playlist on my YouTube channel of like Nazis, actual Nazis that were converted. And none of them say it was through shame.
Yeah.
They all say it was through reason and compassion.
Right.
Those are the things that actually get people to change. So it's like, on what level do we want to, like, this is the distinction I try to draw frequently is like, okay, on what level and to what degree are we just going to like be on damage control and manage symptoms? And then on what level are we actually going to take a look at these disastrous and catastrophic ideologies from their roots and try to pull the roots out?
Yeah.
And it's,
and that's necessary. Like it's like, I think a lot about like when people thought that like the earth was flat or whatever, or sorry, that the earth was the center of the universe. Right. And like Galileo got punished for saying that it wasn't, right? And he ended up being right. And like we needed the freedom for someone to say, well, wait a minute, I have like another idea, right? And you're not gonna like this because it's gonna like disrupt everything that you think, right? It's gonna shake your world up, right? But I gotta get it out so we can talk about it. Like that throughout humanity has changed our understanding of where we are in the cosmos. And even like like women gaining the right to vote, like people had to be free to like express that, right? And say, I think I should be allowed to vote. People are like, oh, you know what I mean? It's like we can't, humanity is always going to be facing changes, and we need to have the freedom to express all of our ideas around these difficult issues, or else we're not going to be able to arrive at the truth. Like, it's just, this is why, yeah, I err on the side of free speech, even though I do, I see what you're saying about, wanting to make sure that we do police really toxic behavior. But where that line is, like, needs to be very, very carefully placed.
Yeah, that I think is the big thing. And I think just engaging in conversations like that in general would be great.
Yeah.
Because like, fuck, we just got a bunch of people yelling over each other and not even, it doesn't seem like a lot of people are even aware that a middle ground is a potential.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And I'd love for that to just enter the conversation of like, okay, like you're concerned with this, and this has very real implications that we need to look out for. And you guys are concerned with this, and these are very real issues to take. Because honestly, I'm on the side of free speech, like just because in order to have a healthy mind, you need to be able to think the full range of thoughts.
Right. Yeah.
And so if you want to have a healthy society, you need to be able to speak the full range of thoughts.
Right.
Like what you were saying is like, so it's because people talk about like, oh, you can't give Nazis a platform because it's like blah, 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 blah. And then I'm like, do you really think you wouldn't beat a Nazi in a debate?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
totally.
what the fuck? Like, give me the top guy and I will shred him in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
It's not difficult. Like, it's literally one sentence. It's like, oh, eugenics? Did you know Jews are smarter than you? Done.
Yeah.
Literally done.
Yeah. And I think what people are actually afraid of is just that, like, I don't know, people are dumb and they wouldn't be able to discern the better argument, So there's like also a level of like needing to trust our fellow humans to like, have a brain and be able to explore different ideas and discern the truth. Because I think what it really is when people want to just, when they're like, we shouldn't even debate Nazis, we just need to ban them, is because they are worried that like other people are going to be seduced by their arguments, right?
Yeah. It's like, it's really like they're afraid they wouldn't win.
Yeah.
That's really absurd to me. Like, like, give me someone with bad ideas and I will make it absolutely clear how bad their ideas are.
Yeah.
And I'd like to think we have people that are at least as brave as me. I'm not even that smart. And I could do it. So there should be people way smarter than me lining up to poke all the holes in like eugenics and white supremacy and all this shit. It's not difficult. It doesn't, even on the scientific basing they claim to have, none of it actually holds up in any kind of like scientific claim. Like it's just all bad.
Yeah.
And when we shit on the people that are like contemplating it, we're like, well, I don't know. Like maybe I'm better because I'm white. You're like, I don't know. And if we shit on them, then the only places, like you said, that they can go to discuss these ideas are with people that have the intent to indoctrinate them.
Right.
Because if they even bring it up to the others, they're going to be like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, blah, 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 blah. It's like, whoa, okay, I'll go
so
discuss
they can
this on
actually
Thursday.
explore with people who would turn their thinking around, right?
Mm-hmm.
The only option is to talk to the people that are like,
Exactly.
So then you have confirmation bias.
Exactly. Where it's like, if you come to me and you tell me the white people are better, I'll be like, interesting. Why do you think that?
Yeah, exactly.
And then you just tease out all their ideas until you realize how bad they are.
Yeah. And this comes right back to, the whole Patreon thing is that, even though that was sparked by just like one word that was used, the fear became that, you wouldn't, the fear is that you wouldn't be able to explore ideas the way that you're describing, especially ones where people are like, we've closed the book on that. There is no reason to discuss that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
When in reality, like, we need to be free to have the full range of thought and the discourse and the dialogue in order to actually know why the truth is the truth. It's one thing for people to be like, X is bad. We already figured it out. Don't even think about it. Don't worry about it. This is the answer. And if you're a human with like half a brain, you're going to be like, well, why? How did we arrive there? I want to know why.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and it's not that's
to ask why.
No, and I don't think that's off the table because we've done that. It's like, oh, Holocaust? Yeah, really bad idea. Like death camps and genocide? No, we don't even talk about that. That's not an option anymore. Slavery,
Yes.
not an option anymore. We don't discuss it.
Yeah.
So it's not that the idea of reaching that kind of consensus is off the table.
Yeah.
I think it's how the fuck do we get there?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So what do you think? Can you come up with any guidelines or structures or anything like that that could actually help us like identify something like that? Because this is kind of new territory for me.
Guidelines to help us identify.
Like what the actual non-starters are. Like I think genetic superiority is like, it's like you could look into that because some people are going to be smarter, some people are going to be more athletic, and like for statistical reasons it might be cool to know, but like I don't
Yeah.
necessarily see a whole lot of real life application to it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that there are definitely things as a society that we have closed the book on, but like the farther you get away from the time where we like figured that out, the more people are going to be like, well, why? You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? So, and I see this happening a lot with actually people exploring alternative relationship structures.
Mm-hmm.
So like polyamory versus monogamy. And my personal opinion is that our ancestors were essentially maybe like operating polyamorously and then realized that it came with a lot of impracticalities and anxieties that would not be conducive to child rearing.
Mm.
So, because people often would say to me, well, nobody questions monogamy. Why doesn't anybody question monogamy? Who's to say that's the best way to form a relationship and to form a family? And having explored the other side of that and thoroughly gone through the thought process, I ended up back at monogamy because I was like, oh,
Same.
people thought about this already and they tried it out. They tried out a different way and they saw empirically like what happened when they lived in this way with, you know, multiple partners or whatever, and how that felt to them, what that implied for their future, the security or lack of security it provided for them and their children, for their ability to, you know, get and share the resources that they needed to raise their children. I think that's something where my generation is like, well, no one ever questions that and we need to question it. So my point being that you can get so far away from the point in time where we worked through it and arrived at the conclusion that then you still need to have the freedom to, like, maybe humanity never does really close the book on ideas, because the farther we get away from the point in time when we like figured that out and all agreed that like this is the way to do things,
Yeah.
that
That's
people are going to be
actually
like, but why?
That's actually a really good point because it's like if enough time passes and we forget about Hitler, let's say, or
Yeah.
Stalin,
Yeah.
and and we get ourselves in as bad a situation as Germany was, and then somebody as charismatic comes along and gives us as bad of things, it's like, well, we don't talk about that, but it's like we don't know why we don't talk about that, so maybe we should talk about it.
Exactly. So yeah. So my point being that like, yeah, I think society does arrive at like consensus at some points in time, but then as time goes on, we still need to have unrestricted speech and freedom of thought in order to actually remember why we arrived there. Because yeah, I think people are going to forget and they'll take it for granted. I think that's a big thing happening in my generation, is actually taking for granted the stability that like a monogamous family structure provides, and then questioning it, right? Not to say that everybody had a stable monogamous family structure, but like if you look at the data, it does reduce violence in society, so and create stability. So yeah, like I think people forget, and then they're like, well, nobody questions this. And you sort of feel like, you know, it like it's a weird phenomenon. I know when I was younger, I was like, I people are telling me all these things and ways of being and things that are true, but like I just need to find out for myself. Like
Mm-hmm.
I don't trust what people are telling me.
I'm the
Like
same way.
I'm truly an independent thinker and I just need to know for myself,
Mm-hmm.
right? So and some people don't do that. Some people are like, well, this is the way things are and I accept that and this is what people have told me to do, and that, and you know, and it's like it's interesting because like it just depends kind of who you are, but you do need the freedom to, if you are that open-minded person that thinks critically and wants to explore ideas for yourself, you need the freedom to do so. Maybe you'll end up right back at where people were telling you well, this is the way, and we figured it out, you know?
Yeah. And I
Maybe
actually had the
someone,
same experience with you as when it comes to monogamy and polyamory. It's
yeah,
like I tried it for a long time, and it was just like I have some people that do it and they seem to be healthy, and their relationships seem to be, thriving, but it's like to a large degree that's their whole lifestyle.
huge
And
cost.
so yeah, and so it's like cool if like you want to devote your whole life to that lifestyle, then yeah, like, yeah, you can make it work. Great. And you can have like communities and all sorts of shit. Like people do it in beautiful ways. That's great. Uh, but not for me. Like
Sure.
it's just too much time and too much effort. And it does take away from the stability, because it's like, how are you going to build depth and stuff if you're constantly in fight or flight?
Yes,
And it's like,
exactly.
I don't know how to do that.
Or if you're constantly having to negotiate the boundaries of what you mean to each other and the boundaries of your behavior in relation to each other and in relation to other people.
Mhm.
Um, it's, yeah, if you're constantly renegotiating and trying to figure out what those boundaries are and trying to push them and then saying, oh, well, that didn't feel good, but what about this? And what about this? Like, it's so much time, so much effort, and it really can distract you from other things in life. At least that was my experience. And then looking at the social science, there is a lot of social science on, you know, the health of children that were raised in two-parent households,
Oh yeah.
right? That's like the science is pretty much clear on that. That like that is how you produce healthy, stable children. So I could see people being into the polyamorous lifestyle when they're younger and exploring and whatever. But once you want to get serious about having a family, it's just there's no other. I don't see another way to do it that actually creates stability for both the parents and the children.
Hmm.
Because if dad's out on a date with someone, then you know you're or he falls in love with someone else, that's time, energy, and resources that are being diverted from the core family unit, right?
Yeah, and it's like I have friends that are raising kids in that environment, but I
Interesting.
don't know any adults that were raised in that environment. And
Yeah,
I don't know anybody who's raised a kid to the point where I can see how they've developed.
right. Yeah.
So it's like I'm not clear on long-term implications, but I do know people that I trust who are doing it. But I guess I'll just have to see how it turns out, because I don't know what those kids end up being like.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's definitely so, especially living in San Francisco, and you just like see it everywhere.
Yeah.
It's yeah, it's not for
So,
me.
so I'm looking at the time. We've got
Oh yeah,
17 minutes left, or 12 minutes left, and I just want to wrap up real quick so we can, cover any last minute shit that we need to. So here's what I'm getting out of this conversation, and then I'm going to ask what you're getting out of it. It sounds like the conflict is, if we censor too much, we create a monster that's much worse than the one we wanted to contain. And if we don't censor at all, then we have a monster over here that's essentially preying on, please everybody forgive me for saying this, but that's preying on the weakest minds.
yeah,
Because it's like, yeah, it's like the weakest minds over here that are going to turn sour, and it's the weakest minds over here that are going to crumple under the pressure. There's just going to be people that can't handle emotional responsibility either ever or at some point in their life, and like there needs to be safeguards for that. That's what I'm taking away. To me, censorship is a last resort, and but at the same time, I want to see some kind of structure where if someone's become a meme and they're in genuine danger of taking their lives, that there's something that can be done for that person. Like,
yeah,
I don't know what. I can barely come close to projecting any ideas that would probably not be any better than Facebook's. But
yeah,
I just want something.
yeah,
Something.
yeah,
And to me, that's kind of my biggest takeaway, is I can see the conflict a little bit more clearly now.
yeah. It's definitely the ideas are intention about um, yeah, essentially, and both I believe both sides are well intentioned. I
Mm-hmm.
believe that the folks that want speech to be unrestricted are the people that are fully aware of what restrictions on speech could lead to. We talked about how it can actually lead to like a place for um, someone to seize power that then not good. And then the folks that want more restrictions, I think they genuinely want to protect people from, things that could hurt them. So these values and desires are in conflict, and we don't have a resolution right now, but it's like a conversation that needs to continue, especially as these tech platforms get bigger and we're having more and more of our communication happening through them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if anybody watching this wants to engage in a conversation, for me personally, the conversation I'd like to see happening is, what the fuck is the middle ground? I'd love to see people really digging into this idea of like, how can we make sure that we don't create bigger demons while making sure that the ones that we have don't destroy everything?
Right.
Like, that's to me, that's the real thing.
Yep.
All right. Any other closing statements or anything for you?
No, I think that was a conversation. Yeah,
this was really good for both of us not really being ready to do this. I think it like turned out really good.
There's a lot to say on the topic. Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for being here. Check AllSides.com out. We realized we didn't mention that at all.
Yes. Yes, I work at AllSides.com, and we talk a lot about these types of issues, and we try to provide balanced perspectives on political issues, including free speech. So AllSides.com.
Yes. So if you want more of these ideas, more of this content, check them out, because this is a great way to get a balanced perspective and hopefully contribute to a conversation that'll bring us together rather than just keep us fucking at each other's throats.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you. And thank you. There's a fucking button.